This is the sermon for July 25th, 2021, and I'm just letting my bird baby join in the sermon. So, this is about trusting in God, having faith as trust. So, I'm going to read from Luke 8:22 through 26. One day, Jesus and his disciples got in a boat. "Let's cross the lake," he said, and off they went. It was smooth sailing, and Jesus fell asleep. A terrific storm came up suddenly on the lake. Water poured in, and they were about to capsize. They woke Jesus. "Master, Master, we're going to drown." Getting to his feet, Jesus told the wind, "Silence," and the waves, "Quiet down." They did it. The lake became smooth as glass. Then he said to his disciples, "Why can't you trust me?" They were in absolute awe, staggered and stammering. "Who is this anyway? He calls out to the winds and the sea, and they do what he tells them?" So I wanted to tell you I really enjoyed annual conference this year. I was able to attend from my living room. It was all day Friday and half of a day Saturday, today, when I'm recording this. And the bishop at one point said, "Don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big God is." And I decided I like that. It's really good. Don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big God is. Well, I read this in an article that the Greek word for what we translate faith is actually not agreeing to certain beliefs, but about trust. And that really helped me think about things differently. And so when you read the word faith, which actually comes through in the translation from Luke 8 that I read, it used to be Jesus would say, "O ye of little faith." That's way back to the King James Version. And in the Message, Eugene Peterson translated the word faith, trust. Jesus asked, "Why can't you trust me?" So the newer translations do have good things to say, and I appreciate that. So anyway, we could talk about helping people to grow in trust rather than to assent or to agree to certain beliefs. Certain beliefs, I've often said, can be nailed down, very much like Jesus being nailed to the cross. I don't know how helpful it is. Beliefs can give us guidelines, but I think Jesus in the New Testament is talking about trust. The early church creeds, which is why I don't use them very much, were about drawing territories and saying, "You are one of us, you are not one of us. You agree to this creed, you are one of us, you are not." And so I don't think that faith has to do with believing certain things. Trust is more about breathing, getting quiet, letting go, and trusting God in this present moment. Trust is showing up, which is different from the American way of worrying or running away. I vividly remember when I was a kid going to YMCA summer camp, and I was quite the swimmer, short, fat, round, and quite the swimmer. And there was a thing called Polar Bear Club, which meant we would get up and go swimming before breakfast. And we shivered and we turned blue, and our teeth were chattering during this early morning swim. And I've been swimming since I was 4 years old, and now I'm having to learn all over again and have to be careful because I'm not as fat, and so therefore I don't float like I used to. And so I have to be sure that I can swim to the edge or swim to where I'm going, that I need enough strength for that. So it's kind of funny that I get to be a kid all over again. Um, yeah, so all the years I swam in the past, I was good at floating, and now I have to be careful. It's a challenge. Well, when young children learn to float, they need to trust that the water will hold them up if they can relax on top of the water. So a teacher puts her one hand beneath the back of the little boy trying to learn how to float, and her other hand under the legs of the little boy, and then she encourages him to relax. And then she removes her hands so that he can experience floating. But what happens is the moment she moves her hands, he's scared and he turns into a V and starts sinking. And so every time the boy starts to panic and starts to sink. Those of us that know how to swim know that the human body can float on the water's surface. Of course, it helps tremendously if you have a chest full of breath, so you breathe in to float a little better. But it's hard to relax when you feel like you're going to go down. The fear of drowning can cause anyone to tense up and thrash about in the water. It's similar to helping people relax into being present, to breathe, and to trust. It's a real catch-22 because the more you thrash, the more you panic, the more you spend your energy, and the sooner you sink down in the water. And the opposite is true. The more you breathe and trust, the more you relax, the more you spread out on top of the water, the more you will float, and the longer you will enjoy being in the water or in God's presence. It's very similar either way. So which will you practice with God? The floating, this trusting, the spreading out on the water, or the thrashing around, depending on ourselves and sinking? I've seen myself in this. The more I tense up, the more I thrash about, the more I panic that I'm going down, the less I trust God. God seems to say, much like the swimming teacher, trust me and relax. And I yell, I can't trust. I'm sinking here. Don't you care? Very much like the disciples during the storm in the boat. I can imagine them waking Jesus up and saying, don't you care? We're going down. We say we're trusting when things are going well, right? But when things are going well, we're not tested. And so we don't know if we're trusting or not. In fact, I think we're trusting ourselves under those circumstances. And it's much like the quote that I gave last week, that believers sparkle like stained glass when the sun is shining. But when the darkness descends, there must be a light within to show the beauty of the stained glass. Faith tends to be a panic-driven affair if we are not accustomed to trusting little by little. How can we trust little by little? Notice in moments throughout the day, are you breathing? Are you trusting in each moment, whether tense or not? Under stress, that's the time to notice. Are you trusting? Are you breathing? Are you aware of God's presence? I love that. And of course, I have to take baby steps before I can take big leaps. When anxiety is high or some diagnosis has brought us low, that's a good time to trust. But maybe we need to build up to the bigger steps in trust. The slightest new situation will twist a relaxed, trusting attitude into one of mental strain and spiritual expenditure. We tend to think if I believe hard enough or plead with God urgently enough, maybe God will come through. Work harder to have faith, we think, or we have the choice of relaxing into trusting God. This is the situation. When Jesus' disciples act frantically in a storm-tossed boat one night, a relaxed attitude isn't the first instinct in a crisis. The Greek word, like I said, that we often translate as faith or belief would serve us better if it were translated as trust. Trust is the deeper meaning. Trust is the attitude of receiving what God has given us in the first place. It's the opposite of panic. So it's just such a beautiful concept that trust and grace are what we need. We have them already. So that's what we need to do. If we want to trust God, we relax into God's arms and believe that God holds us. That's very different from thrashing around in a panic, hoping that we don't go down in the water. So, faith as trust is investing in God, giving over the whole of life, putting all our eggs in one basket. Faith as trust is the totality of giving our lives to God. When we relax in the presence of someone whom we're confident is fond of us, is worthy of our trust, you can see how things will go better. More than an achievement that comes from desperate thrashing about, faith is a gift to relax into and receive confidence from. That little 4-year-old boy with the swim teacher, without panic, enough to begin floating more easily. He didn't start to float because he worked harder at it. He started to float because he could trust that strong, friendly woman teacher in the pool, and he knew that she was fond of him. We can let go and trust God, believing that God, as that swim teacher, is quite fond of us too. And I want to finish with some quotes from Brother Lawrence, practicing the presence of God. He lived in the 1600s and he washed pots and pans in the kitchen. And he learned more and more about being in God's presence from that job of washing pots and pans. So he said, I don't practice any particular disciplines. I have no specific techniques to meditate. I know those methods work for many people, but for me, when I tried them, I spent all my time rejecting my wandering thoughts. Their only purpose, those disciplines, is to bring a person into the presence of God. So why should I practice those techniques when I have found the shortcut? If every moment I'm consciously practicing love, doing all things for God's sake, then I don't need to worry about those spiritual methods. My thoughts are the biggest obstacles to living in the presence of God. The little useless thoughts that drift through my head, making mischief, distract me. I've learned to reject them as soon as I notice them. They have nothing to do with the reality at hand. Once I stop paying attention to them, I can get back to communing with God. So, Brother Lawrence really understood this. My only prayer, Brother Lawrence said, is to practice attention toward God. I carry on a habitual, silent, and secret conversation with God that fills me with overwhelming joy. When we walk in the presence of God, the busiest moment of the day is no different from the quiet altar of prayer. So you can have the quietest moment on your knees in a church sanctuary, or you can be in a busy situation where people are making all kinds of noise. Both of them, if you give your full attention to God, are equal. So may we trust God in that way. Amen.